A very warm welcome to everybody. Good evening if you are in Singapore and around Southeast Asia. Otherwise, good morning, good day to you. Thank you for tuning in again on Zoom or on Facebook. Today, we will be talking about choosing a preschool, and it is the first part of a two-part series. We will be looking at some long-standing preschool curriculums or philosophies, Montessori, Reggio Emilia, inquiry-based learning, and looking at it through, the lens of research, especially what brain science say about them. A bit more introduction. If you are just joining us for the very first time, this is our 26th webinar. And my name is Cheryl. I am trained as a pediatric physical therapist. And I've been working with the brain since I graduated, first in the hospital and now in a private setting. I am a mother to two girls, and it's really impacted my personal take on the molding a brain as well. So Singapore, BrainFit was started in Singapore in the year 2001. So we're close to 20 years old now. And these are the locations that we have learning centers or partner schools that we work with. So you will see that's why we have an international crowd here, and I'm supported by my team of very capable panelists from the different countries. So here you can see some of our learning centers in the different countries, and we offer enrichment programs from kids as young as 9 months all the way to seniors and adults and seniors, and we run a preschools in some of our locations as well. These are some of the partners whom we have been working with, and some awards that we have won, throughout this 20-year or so journey. And let's get into the topic for today. So we are looking at preschool curriculums and philosophies, right? And the next webinar, we are going to be discussing actually what we do at BrainFit, which is a cognitive-based model. So it's just really different kind of models of curriculum. I think it's a really important topic because the preschool years are the years of our children's brain. We all talk about, how a brain is shaped, rapidly in the early years, and it's very real. Yeah, some of these networks that are laid down, in the brain, you find that can be quite robust, right? In the sense that if you lay down strong pathways, it can serve the children very well going forward, as a foundation. But if not, we can also have kind of like, less desirable pathways. But of course, none of these curriculums, I think, would be heading in that way. It's just that, that this is an important part of a child's life, right? So I think where we're sending them to school, kind of, our decisions, I think it's useful to certainly take some time to look at it. Oh, I just want to share a little bit first. This is quite personal. How I even end up, doing a webinar like this one. I am a therapist by training. I am a pediatric trained physical therapist, right? I've been working in the area of brain enrichment for a very, very long time. And that is my primary specialization. I do have two girls, and I have mentioned that they shape my work. I mold their brains, I'm responsible for them, and I have to make decisions for them. So we didn't have a school. I was not really in tune with the world of education, I must confess, for a large part of my career, right? And then I had Isabel, my firstborn, and Isabel was sent to a Reggio school, all right? A school that I really like. It's based on the philosophy of Reggio Emilia. I love the environment, the collaboration, and we'll talk about some of these philosophies, right? And I was happy. I did get concerned, right? So my first inkling of, maybe, kind of thinking more about schooling, right? So of course, Isabel had all the brain enrichment activities. But when she was sometime in kindergarten 2, so that was in K2, I was concerned that she wasn't really developing reading. Yeah. And I remember at a birthday party with all her friends, all the parents were talking about where they were sending their kids for extra enrichment after school. And when, when I said that, oh, is that what you're doing? They were shocked that I wasn't doing anything after school. I'm quite a strong believer of not scaffolding further through tuition. I think there is a lot of things in life more than just academics. So I like them to be exposed to different things, spend time with her sister playing, build her social skills. So for me, you're already spending half a day in school. This was a kindergarten she was at. Do we really need to do tuition? And she was young. So I was quite averse and am still, right? I think that school hopefully can take care of academics, and then we have our life, that you do sports and everything else. So I was concerned, and I realized that most, if not all the parents, right, were involved in some form of enrichment, math, and especially academic ones. So that was when I thought, we whipped out our own reading intervention. I remember doing that in June of the year because she starts primary one, the next year. So I had 6 months to really build up her reading skills without going through a tuition an external kind of route. And then I had my younger one at that time, right? Victoria was just starting school. That experience, right, really got me seriously into thinking about and studying, the preschool landscape, because I had to make a decision whether I wanted my younger child to go through the same thing. And I had my own ideas because I work with the brain. And at that time, we were running a baby program, and we were, building brains in 9-month-old kids, onwards, and we were getting very good outcomes. So I was really encouraged by parents of some of these kids here to extend it into a school. Yeah, because there wasn't really a kind of very strongly cognitive-based school, I guess, that they could access. So that's the story from my transition, right? So I'm sharing with you my deep research into this area about 3 years ago, a little bit, earlier, around 3-4 years ago, before we embarked into the journey, and now we have a kindergarten, right? So as you can see, my children do shape my life. And before we go on, sorry for the long intro, I just want to start with a poll. As we go into looking at the different philosophies, looking at the science of learning. So I have 2 questions. Question 1, do you think children are born curious, ready to learn competently and independently? So it's a true-false question. And the second question is, do you think the most powerful influence on learning is, and you choose one, the teaching method, the teacher, the child's interest and motivation, or prior knowledge, which is the child, what they already know, all right? So or what they currently know. Let me pull up the poll. There we go. Okay, I hope you can see the poll on your screen, right? No right and wrong answers, don't worry. So if you can get some participation from all of you, that will be great. So children are born curious, ready to learn competently, independently, right? Do you think that's a true statement, or do you think that's an untrue statement? And the most powerful influence on learning from your point of view is the teaching method. So you're here to, kind of discuss teaching methods together. The teacher, child's interest and motivation, right? Or prior knowledge, all right? That what they know. So thank you. I've got about 70% participation already. Okay, I shall end the poll right now. It's still coming in. I'll just wait a few more seconds and then we shall end the poll. Thank you for your participation. It feels really nice to have participation in a webinar, by the way. Otherwise, it's really one way. Gets a bit lonely, all right? So it's nice to get some engagement. Okay, great. I shall end the poll. We've got about 80%, yeah? It's nice. And let's look at the results. Here we go. Yes, 90% think it is true. Children are born curious, ready to learn, competently, independently. Great. Number 2, the most powerful influence on learning is 30% of our audience think is the teaching method. Yeah, and we are discussing teaching methodologies today. The teacher, 12%, and more than half, slightly more than half of our audience think is about the child, where your interest and motivation lie. About 3%, all right, thinks it's a prior knowledge, what the children know. All right, let me stop sharing this and let's move on. We'll examine this in a bit. We'll come back to these ones, yeah? Okay, so our agenda, right? There's actually 3 parts. It is quite a bit to cover, and I'll try my best, yeah. Because these are big curriculums. I mean, it's almost doing a disservice, to just kind of quickly talk about them, but I think that's all the time we have. So I will try my best, yeah. So an overview of Montessori, Reggio, and inquiry-based learning. And I want to share research, what I can find. And this is really sharing my journey, as a therapist to someone who is, in education, deep in education now, early childhood education. And I want to talk about research from brain science, which is my comfort zone, my area, that I am familiar with. We call it the science of learning. Yeah. So we study, what are the systems, that's needed for learning and learning successfully. Yeah. So let's get going with the first part, an overview of Montessori, Reggio, and inquiry-based. Now, I want to start off with giving you a bit of background information. Now, I know that a lot of you might be parents with very young babies, and your children may not be even in school yet, right? So you're just joining us to know a little bit, about maybe decision making, right? So I want to frame it within certain trends in the early childhood world. Yeah, certainly from my research, this is what I have gathered. Yeah, so we are. When I went to school, that was the traditional classroom method, right? Where you have a teacher up there and then you have little chairs, I mean, pretty much like elementary or primary classroom in Singapore, but this is in the kindergarten or the preschool world. Yeah, so the traditional approach is seen, is often described as a teacher-directed approach. Yeah, so teacher directs the impartation of knowledge. The teacher is the wise one. I give you knowledge. Yeah. Students tend to be passive. So you're thinking, your vessel, you're just kind of absorbing. You're not doing much. You're sitting there. I mean, you are learning, but you're sitting there learning, right? It's the teacher that's kind of like the one, the act belongs to the teacher. And of course, the concern was that, I mean, it's one size fits all, right? Approach. And students are not really engaged. So students are in that passive mode, yeah, and just receiving information. So, maybe that's not so great. And certainly in many territories, countries, places, this might still be the mainstay, yeah. Now, the modern classroom, so there is a shift to new concepts that's related to the first question on my poll, right? So then the thinking that, look, the children are capable, right? And 90% of our audience, just in today's session, we think that, yes, children are born ready and capable of learning. So rather than just being passive recipients, they should get more ownership and empowerment in their learning journey, right? And I think that sounds very logical. So child-led learning philosophies start to be more popular, right? And some of these have been around for a very, very long time, right? So the concept is that students can direct their own learning because they have the innate capabilities. So they become more active. So you talk about teachers being facilitators. Children are actively owning their learning, right? Actively engaged, being involved. So you think about classrooms like more kind of, a group in small groups, etc. So there is certainly a shift from teacher-directed approaches to child-led approaches. Yeah, and the shift, one of the main things is really student engagement. How can we deepen learning, right? So that kids are more active. And of course, I mean, the idea of kids, being involved, certainly we already think that they probably are learning more. Yeah, so hence that shift. So that's the backdrop. And the philosophies that I'm discussing today are all belonging to that child-led, kind of family. All right, we call that the constructivism, right? So students construct their own knowledge. So that's just a big term. So I'm not going to use that. But yes, children lead their own learning. All right, so we just use these terms. So some of the popular preschool philosophies, right, which is under the child-led kind of approach. I think one of the longest history one, it's by Dr. Maria Montessori. She was a medical physician, right? So like me, she worked in a hospital. Yeah, she was working in the pediatric department. So, I feel I can connect with her, right? So we like to investigate and bring science. She was very science-based, yeah? So she investigated, and her philosophy was that children should develop not just academically, but holistically, physically, socially, emotionally, etc. And remember, this is a long time ago, more than 100 years ago, right? And I think for what she has achieved, it is very remarkable. So what did she believe in? She believed that every child has the ability to reach his potential on his own if given the freedom and the environment to which to develop naturally, right? So, her the big belief, right, is that children have the ability so they can direct their own learning. And she was big on independence. And for all the Montessori experts out there, please pardon me, right, if I am, I may not have the complete story, right? I have done my best research, and I'm certainly, open, to be educated. I mean, it's like a sharing, yeah. So this is certainly what I gathered, right? And the tools, so for her, the environment was important, the prepared environment, she calls it, right? So children will go through work cycles, right, where they're not interrupted in their engagement, and they choose, they have a choice. So there's empowerment into the tools, and there were specially designed tools like tower blocks, the pink blocks and all that, right? And to help the children learn. And there was an academic focus with the Montessori approach that looks at phonics development for literacy acquisition as well. So here you see, yes, the pink tower. I do have a picture of that. Yeah, beautiful toys and very accessible to the child, the heights, so that children can direct their own learning with teachers as facilitators, right? So the teachers are actively coaching each child, who have their learning pathways. So that's Montessori, yeah, as a quick overview, right? And Reggio Emilia, right? Reggio Emilia is actually not the name of the person who invented, who came up with the philosophy, but it's the area in Italy. So it's a place called Reggio Emilia. The philosophy is actually founded by a gentleman, Loris Malaguchi, yeah, and that's after World War II, yeah. So in the 1940s, again, long-standing philosophies. So his belief was that children, he called them knowledge bearers. They had knowledge. They are active constructors of knowledge. They are competent, curious, and creative, yeah. And so the teacher is really facilitating them, it's just a facilitator because they can construct their own knowledge. Yeah. So the focus is, again, the child can direct the learning. So a lot of control, into what they want to learn. For example, in the school where Isabel went to, the children will decide on the themes. So when we meet, certain terms, there was a theme, but by one term, the teachers will tell us, we have no theme. The children will decide, on the theme. And they chose herbs and spices, all right? That was when my older daughter was attending a Reggio kindergarten. And a lot on social collaboration, yeah? So the social emotional aspects was highly looked at or emphasized. So the tools will be the use of interactive spaces, a lot of natural plants, beautiful environment, and also collaborations, right? So natural interactions and group collaborations to explore and discover and learn. So that would be a Reggio classroom, yeah, the children's pieces, all around. And there were things that they could interact with, rocks, pebble, a lot of connection to nature. Now, this is Inquiry, which is a kind of UK, or Inquiry, which is US, right? I probably should use Inquiry because it is founded by John Dewey, in the US around the 1960s. And a few people had at the same time, been talking about different but parallel kind of philosophies like problem-based learning or experiential learning, right? But for inquiry-based, it's kind of more John Dewey. So the belief is that children should be active learners, that they should ask questions, research, solve problems, investigate, hands-on learning, again, participate in the actual solving of the problem, creating of ideas, or even coming up with the problem, right? And that's how they learn best. So the focus was very much on student-directed problem-based approach, yeah? Tools would be through small group discussion, guided learning by the teacher, again, a teacher as a coach or facilitator, and exploration. Now, like I mentioned, inquiry-based learning, right? Also, it discuss kind of like parallels would be discovery learning, problem-based learning, experiential learning. Now, I must just clarify, I think asking questions is a very natural thing. Whether you're in a Montessori school, I'm sure the Montessori teachers, are asking questions. It's just what we do with kids. For example, this is posted on our Facebook, right? Children looking at a leaf, so teacher would just say, what do you notice? Right? I mean, it's very natural, right? That we do that with little kids, right? I hope it is natural, because that certainly getting the kids to think, yeah, it's good. It engages the child. So child one saying the leaf is green and brown, right? And then you have a second question: why do you think some leaves might be brown? So these are our children answering. Maybe because we didn't wash the leaves, so maybe it was dirty. All right, the brown leaves looks dry. The child's onto something. Now, maybe it's too hot and the leaves didn't drink enough water. All right, so this would be their thinking. And of course, we coach them and guide them along the way. So when we look at inquiry-based learning, it's not that we are asking questions, but it's really designing the entire curriculum around problem solving. Right? So topical kind of problem solving. Yeah. So I think we need to kind of separate what does inquiry means, because at the surface level, you think, oh, is it just a questioning approach? No, it's deeper than that, right? It's the different phases of questioning, how you would questioning to lead the child into the solution, right? So that's that. And many schools use it as well, not just preschools. Yeah. And yeah, it's quite widely adopted. So now I'm just going to share with you in my journey, of moving from, a hospital kind of a therapist, right, into education, yeah, early childhood education. And some of the findings that I was encountering. So this paper this is a newer paper, just in 2020, right? We have a kindergarten by then. An article on the conversation, right? Maria Montessori challenge and change how kids are taught and remains influential today. Yeah, I mean, lots of famous people, right? Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, they went through Montessori, yeah, and they are very successful. And it is one of the most widely not the most, but it's from the point of view of the traditional philosophies, it's widely adopted, right? And one of the reasons is because, certain philosophies really require kind of like more specific learning, teaching, teacher training from an organization, whereas Montessori was really more of a philosophy. So different people can adopt it, yeah, and different people have. So I take a lot, so I read quite a lot, right? But I did take quite a bit of information from this particular paper. It's in 2017, The Science of Learning, the journal of that. So Montessori Education, a review of the evidence. So this is from somebody from UCL in the Institute of Education in London, right? Who had kind of looked into that. So I'm just kind of sharing. Now, the first thing I want to say is, it is very difficult when you look at really kind of like hard research findings, which I'm used to, coming from a medical kind of background, right? We look at randomized control trials, right? It's really, really difficult to do randomized control trials in early childhood, education, right? And the author was acknowledging that there are many methodological challenges to carrying out good quality educational research. including on the Montessori method. But this is not exclusive to that. It's because there's so many variables. Is it the different teachers, right? The environment. And then how about the demographics? Certain type of parents choose certain schools, right? So is it because it's a type of parenting that creates that result? So it's hard. It's really hard to find. So that's why you want to look at meta-analysis or reviews that look at many studies, right? So I think the conclusion was that it was very hard to draw really solid kind of golden, evidence-based, like in medicine, right? What we expect kind of conclusion. However, there is ample evidence from the wider educational literature that certain elements of the Montessori method, such as especially teaching early literacy, and I'll come to that, right? Through a phonics approach, embedded in a rich language context, and providing a sensorial foundation for mathematical education are effective. All right. So certain elements. So the scientists try and even break down if Montessori was effective. What about Montessori made it effective, right? So we're now looking at phonics. We're now looking at the tools that actually the pink towers, right? The sensorial tools that were used. Like what was it? Or maybe it was the cycles. Now the cycles, of learning where the children are not interrupted was investigated, but the research is really hard because pure Montessori, it's also hard to find, yeah? And the author acknowledged that, what they call, fidelity to the Montessori approach. And because there's just so much combination of approaches, schools which may be called Montessori, but only practicing elements of Montessori. So that made research even harder, which is why, it's kind of like hard to conclude. But there's some suggestion that kind of not interrupting the child, right? May be good for building focus, yeah? Now, the REGGIO approach. So what happened was that I drew upon this evaluation in 2018, evaluation of the REGGIO approach to early education. So these authors actually went and investigated Reggio Emilia, the town in Italy, right? And they looked at people who have since, a long time ago, have attended school and how they ended up as adults, if they attended a REGGIO approach preschool or they did not attend a REGGIO approach preschool. So this paper was actually built on the study of the Italians, who were in that area. Now, this is what they found. Now, relative to not receiving formal care, so compared to kids who had not gone to school, the REGGIO approach significantly boosts outcomes related to employment, social emotional skills, high school graduation, that they participated in election, and even obesity, health, indicators. Remember, these are looking at, longitudinal, how did they end up as adults, However, comparisons with individuals exposed to alternative forms of childcare then do not yield strong patterns of positive and significant effects, was the conclusion of this particular study, right? Again, it's hard, because REGGIO is a philosophy. Again, you have, different kind of combo kind of embedded in it, just like Montessori, where you might be a REGGIO school, but with lots of other, things that's inside, making research very difficult. But I think the key, a very important conclusion was that what happens in the early years does make a difference. So children who did not receive formal care, who didn't go to preschools at that time, right? And compared to kids who had, they had significantly better outcomes. I think that itself is a significant discovery because the early years are important. It has an influence in later years in a very real way. And this study kind of reflected that. Now, I want to talk about inquiry-based approach. There is a bit more research on inquiry-based, but very little in early education, right? You will see a lot more research happening using inquiry-based approach in learning the sciences for older children, right? So very active kind of research around there. I did find one 2020 paper, which is looking at, and these were Chinese researchers, right? Mainland China, using an inquiry-based science and engineering program, to promote science knowledge, problem-solving skills in preschool children. And they found that they were able to impart scientific knowledge more effectively. However, my comment was that it wasn't directly compared to teacher-led instruction. It was compared to just regular class, and then you added, inquiry-based approach, right? But so it shows that children are able to learn science concepts. For me, that was the takeaway. Yeah, and because it wasn't really comparing with another approach of the science education with the similar kind of tools. So you really can't comment on the approach itself. I hope I'm not being too technical for some of the parents, all right? It's just that when you're going to research, I think it's just you get into a little bit of kind of different points of view. But what I really want to share is, and there's a lot of write-ups around this, is inquiry-based instruction for the older children. There's a lot more research around there. And even a PISA ranking, I'm not sure whether you're aware. I mean, Singapore ranks very high. Our educational system ranks well on the PISA rank. So it's really looking at different schools in all the different countries, right, at the teens, and then going in to look at how they're doing, for areas like math and sciences, and then ranking the schools, right, independently. So PISA ranking, and according to the 2015 volume, this is what we need to know, right? Students in classrooms using teacher-directed instruction actually perform far better, and this is on PISA, than those in classrooms using inquiry-based. This was the finding. After accounting for students and schools' socioeconomic profile, that means the wealth, whether the parents were educated, greater exposure to inquiry-based instruction is negatively associated with science performance in 56 countries and economies. Yeah, I mean, pretty striking, but also you wonder, how can that be true? Right? And so it raised a lot of questions. So people continue to investigate into the PISA, the discovery. So they're finding that, perhaps the schools, some had weaker students. It wasn't a true comparison. So, but this was what was found. And because it was in 56 countries, so a lot of people set up and looked at it, right? So I think, but I think we have to hold, again, a lot of life is about holding conflicting ideas and figuring things out, right? That's intelligence. So as adults, we then need to exercise that, right? Things are unfortunately not served up in neat pies. You just do this, and then it's done, right? So we have to take the evidence, and this is certainly evidence that a lot of people are looking at as well, right? But let's then evaluate that from brain science. I mean, that is what I will do. What does the brain research say? Is asking questions and inquiry good? Let's get some of the insight from there, because that's really going down to the roots of learning, your brain. How does the brain assimilate information? All right, let's get to it. Okay, so to summarize, right, I think it's hard to do research in this area because there's a lot of not pure kind of approaches, and there's so many other variables, just different teachers, quality, experience of teachers can make results vary a lot. So this is what we know, but we certainly know that certain elements, right, are useful for certain philosophies. Now, I'm going to bring area that I'm a lot more, that's where I've been, most of my adult career life, right? Looking at what does the research say about how the brain learns, So what does the science of learning, if we want to draw more clearer conclusions to guide all of us, to guide me as a mother, to guide me if I was going to form a new approach, right? What do I do? These were the questions that were very important for me, and I think are important questions that parents should be asking. So number one, I just want to start with the tools. So here I want to examine belief, focus, and tools. I want to examine all of them through the lens of brain science. And I want to start with tools. Do environments and tools affect learning? Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to draw from research that I know that are looking at kind of more the science of learning. What are rather than tied to a certain philosophy, what kind of environments? So I've shared this before in one of my earlier webinars on attention, paying attention. If you were here, you would have seen these pictures. This is from Carnegie Mellon University, not too long ago, right? Sharing that when they did a research of different classroom environments that had less visual clutter improve focus and learning in schools, right? The children actually acquired more vocabulary when they taught them in this environment versus that environment. So these are the kind of like really narrowed down, right? I'm just looking at two things that help us to draw clearer conclusions. Yeah, rather than, oh, I'm looking at a certain approach with many different pieces. So certainly, I gravitate to this kind of sciences because you have clearer variables. Yeah. So so we need to think about I think less cluttered environments, but Reggio Emilia bringing nature into the classroom, I think is great, right? We know, I mean, just in my exam prep webinar 2 weeks ago, I talked about having a little indoor plant, right? So the internal plant, having indoor kind of features like plants especially does improve learning, but we got to be worrying about kind of visual clutter, yeah? So that's, I think, the takeaway. So there's really benefits from different things, but this perhaps help us to get greater clarity, right? As what we're looking for, which might be most optimal. Now, we know motor skills are important. So this is from researchers who looked at gross and fine motor skills differentially contribute to language outcomes. A systematic review, again, they look at many, many research papers, yeah? And the answer is that yes, both motor skills, either whether in gross or fine motor, contributes to language learning. So we want the kids to be active, to be hands-on, to be moving in a classroom that allows them to move. Yeah. So this we know, yes, that it's good, it contributes. Fine motor. Now, a program like Montessori emphasizes a lot on the sensory toys, right? And that's good. Why? Because we know from fine motor research, it contributes to mathematical insights. I mean, I did a webinar on the math brain. You would hear me talk about finger perception. We need to raise those in our children. So yes, I can totally understand how the tools would help the children learn because it's activating our fingers and hands. Yeah. So so we want a school, we want to practice, have lots of fine motor activities, gross motor activities that have the children moving. It contributes to math. It's very clear, in fact. And how? And we know exactly how in the brain, because the brain is a spatial area. When you do math, the finger areas are activated. We have brain scans, right? So it guides us in what are the elements, I think, that supports a certain philosophy. Baby spatial reasoning predicts later math skills. Again, space, all right? Math is a spatial subject. Okay, so again, your pink blocks, right? I mean, the pink tower is really looking at spatial understanding. So again, we can definitely see some benefits of that in certain academic areas. Reading. What about reading? Now, reading is really important. I do believe, I just have a personal belief that the school should be responsible for reading, not an enrichment class. Because already I spend so much time in the school, I just feel like just finish all the academics, please, and let me have my play time, right? I have that philosophy anyway, because play is so important and, free play, right? It builds the brain as well. So I like my free play time. So I don't like to be, bogged up by enrichment and tuition. So I think a school should look at that. So in my webinar for reading acquisition, we talk about the big six, right? That many researchers have concluded, and the National Reading Panel is supporting this, yeah? Oral language experience, vocabulary, the teaching of phonemic awareness, which is the sounds of the letters, and also phonics, which is your letter sound knowledge. All very important. Fluency, and comprehension, probably more for the older children, yeah? But yes, a systematic way of teaching phonics is important. All right. So certainly, so you can see that, especially for Montessori, because they have many elements of what we talked about. Yeah. So a hands-on spatial learning tools. We've got explicit phonics instruction. And of course, the learning cycles, there's some evidence that it improves executive function. But again, in the very pure Montessori setting. So, and again, it's hard to have that research because, many settings are not pure. So again, the evidence may be a little less strong, but in the other areas, the tools, certainly these are benefits it is supported by the brain science. Yeah. Okay. So we want to look at brain science to help us figure out what are the elements that we want to take away. Yeah. I think that's helpful. So now, what does the brain science say about? Now we talked about tools. Remember, I want to cover belief and focus as well. Yeah. So let's get to those parts. Yeah. Now, here is when I'm going to get back to my poll. Now, this is where maybe, the brain science deviates a little bit, all right? So question number 1, children are born curious, ready to learn competently and independently. What brain science says is probably not true, right? I know 90%, right? And I don't want to upset all of you. We want to think of our children as competent. And many children are. I must emphasize that. It's not the black and white thing. But many are not. We must acknowledge that we do not view every child who is born as competent. Because if we do, we may miss something, right? So what we know is that children are born differently. Some are very capable, ready to learn. Some are not. And here I want to also talk about a myth that's very common. We really often think of children as whether you are gifted, normal, or learning disabled. Often when I talk about this, people might say, oh yeah, you're talking about the child with the learning disability, right? Yes, I am referring to them, but also many children in the average. Our brain does not exist in compartments. It's all a spectrum of math skills, a spectrum of language skills, right? So we lie anywhere in this spectrum, and most children lie anywhere, everywhere, which is why when we go to school, we have all these bell curves, right? We have the average student, we have the above average, we have the excellent, we have the below average. We are so different, but these differences are present from birth, right? They are, okay? And I'm going to talk about the research around that, yeah? So it's just not a point of view, but where's the backing around that? And number 2, nobody chose prior knowledge, and I'm going to qualify that. The most powerful influence on learning is prior knowledge. And I'm going to talk about prior knowledge because we are talking about the brain. You learn through scaffolding what you already have, then you stick on it. So if you have a lot, you stick better, right? If you're really looking at the learning process. And I'm going to talk about these two because it then talks about the beliefs and the philosophies, yeah? And again, I want to say that many children are ready, but just not all, right? Not all, okay? So children are born with widely different learning abilities, right? Because the genes expressed to form the brain has different networks, and different networks, I call them muscles, may have different fitness, right? Some areas are well connected and fit, others might not be so, yeah? And you can see it in research after research. This is a research that looked at preschoolers' auditory processing, how they can perceive sounds in noise, consonant in noise. This is looking at phonics score, a test that tests whether they can learn phonics, which influence reading, right? So what do we see? We see a scatter plot like that. It is not compartmentalized. It is not a group with great difficulty and a group that is normal. We see children have different auditory processing abilities. Some process sounds well, some don't. And we see correlation with learning abilities, right? So these skills then influence your ability to learn phonics and your reading scores, right? And we know that it predicts. Now, when we talk about prediction, and many of these studies report prediction, prediction is important. Why? It means that the problems don't go away. A lot of people also think we equalize. You grow, but you're just at different, sometime we all equalize. No, when you can predict, we predict 10 years later what happened. That means you have followed that trajectory. You were weak first, you are still weak 10 years later. This is the kind of evidence that we are seeing, right? That certain brain processes have longer terms impact, right, on the child's learning in a very real way. So not just that. Now here is looking at number sense in infancy predicts mathematical abilities in childhood. So this is really middle primary school already. Again, infancy, when you're born, 10 years later, it's able to predict it. All right. So again, babies, has wide spectrum of visual spatial scores, right? Which affects your number sense. And that influences your math results. All right. So from the brain point of view, this is what we see. So we just report that. But yes, there are kids who are very competent as well. So, but to say that every child will be like that, I think will be an inaccurate statement, right? Every child has their own profiles that they learn well in some areas, maybe not so well in certain areas. And here I want to talk about Vygotsky. Now, this is also somebody very well known in the preschool world, although, and some schools will say that they follow the approach, right? It's a broader kind of philosophy, it's a theory, I would say, right? More kind of theoretical concept. So one of the important concepts is the zone of proximal development. And brain science is very much around this, right? So in a simple way, this is what it means. And I'll explain, and this is also linked to why prior knowledge is important. So in every child, at any moment, there are certain things that the child can do. Perhaps I can stack 2 blocks together, just using an example. Then there are some things that a child can do, but I need help, right? If I want you to stack the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th block, maybe I can't. Maybe I need an adult to hold the bottom blocks, or I need you to guide my hands. I can't do it independently, right? The skills is not there, right? And the other area, the child can't way beyond putting kind of sophisticated Lego pieces together, right? I'm not ready for that. I just can't. So you have different areas. When we talk about learning, we are trying to widen the green zone. So you help, and then you practice, and then you have proficiency. So you're growing the green zone. That's how you learn, right? Now, another way to look at it is this, right? I took this from a research article. ZPD is the zone of proximal development. It's close to your knowledge and skills. So the past is what you already know. So it's not just skills, but it's also knowledge, what you already know. But what you can know with assistance, you need somebody to explain to you how that connects. And then you have the future, what is not known yet. Learning is really about increasing, moving this pie, moving this along, teaching, increasing, pushing them to what is already known, increasing, extending your area, your sphere of knowledge, right? Through your zone of ZPD. This is really what learning is about. So what you already know is important because you build on it, right? 5 blocks is built from 2 blocks. Walking is built from crawling and sitting up, right? You have little stepping stones, right? You want to learn algebra, you need your basic numeracy. You need pattern recognition, right? One thing builds on top of the other. So this is what we know about learning. Now, stay with me. In a typical classroom, this is what it really means. Child A, child B, child C. All right, from the graphs that we see. Child A, you have this zone that they can do independently. Child B has a small zone. I need a lot more help from teachers to do the same thing. Now, the task is the same. Okay, for example, learning math. You're teaching counting. And then you have child C, who already knows a lot, who is maybe doing more with some in the ZPD zone, already extending in this task, what the child cannot do is little. This is what the teachers need to deal with. It's not easy, but this is real, right? Because the brains are so different. All right. And what happens if it is child-led methods? So this whole inquiry-based methodology, not doing well in the PISA score, has attracted a lot of attention and debates between child-led versus instructor-led. That means go back to the traditional. The teacher has the knowledge, right? Are children ready to learn? So the proponents, there are a strong group of proponents, right, that believe that the traditional way is more superior. And actually, the PISA scoring is showing that because it's the teacher-led instruction, the schools, the science scores are higher. So it is this child-led, what should we do, right? So, but if you understand ZPD, maybe then we can understand why, why perhaps the children needs heavy guidance from teachers. Even, if they're contributing, I always believe children should be active learners, but should they direct it in the degree that we want them to, like choosing a theme, right? I mean, how far is that? Okay, because if you look at this and you use child-led methods, what happened is that child B will be least interested in whatever activity. Okay, let's say you choose, all right? I let you choose. You can choose to play with the blocks, or you can choose to play with something else, all right? Maybe some phonics cards. Now, if my spatial wasn't strong, blocks need spatial. I am a child who is here. I can almost guarantee you this child will stay the shortest at the block corner. They will lose interest the easiest because they need heavy guidance and the teacher can't be there all the time, right? Unless you're heavily, and teachers will need more help for this child than this child perhaps, right? They will then perhaps gravitate to the phonics activity. We all go to an area that we are good at. That's what we see in research as well. And child C probably will stay in the block counters, the block corners for the longest, because you're building on your prior knowledge, you see. So there's more enjoyment if you look at motivation research. Yeah, so the child will end up practicing more and they become even more confident. So I do believe if you choose certain areas, the children become more competent because you're already naturally selecting the children, choose what they are strong at from the initial. Very strong research showing, and I often talk about this study, you have been with at my webinars, where babies who were given blocks to play, some babies crawled away very quickly. Some babies were so curious about the blocks. These were non-verbal infants. When they scanned the brains, the babies who crawled away had the least activity for spatial mental rotation in their brain. The babies who were most interested in the blocks had the highest networks. So interest and motivation, parents, you are right. Those half of us chose that. That's really important. But remember what is driving that. It's almost your prior knowledge, right? Your current abilities is driving that motivation. So motivation is a result, right? It's a result. It's not an innate, I'm just born like that. Okay, you're born like that, but there are things that are driving that behavior, is what we're understanding about motivation, all right? So motivation is not a character that's kind of fixed. It is what your brain is driving you towards or away from. So the belief, and I certainly am a believer of that, we should not just follow the child's interest. In fact, if you are a parent of our baby program, you will know that I advocate quite the opposite, right? You tend to avoid areas of weaknesses. If the child likes to play with blocks, you keep playing with blocks. And you know what? We buy more blocks. If you like pretend play, I buy you more dinosaurs, more aeroplanes, right? When in fact, if you are not playing with blocks, I'm going to get you to play with blocks because I have an opportunity to build up the spatial area, especially in early childhood. It's precious, right? But you never force a child. If they don't like it, then we have to look at ZPD and slowly scaffold them into the activity. Right? It's got to be a lot of guidance, heavy observation, and skills on the teacher's part. If left to the natural, where the child is just choosing, right, in whatever that they like, unfortunately, we have seen that weaknesses tend to persist well into, the later years. Okay? Now, how about when you apply inquiry-based learning to these students? Again, student B benefits the least, student C benefits the most. So in fact, inquiry-based learning appears most effective, and this is also from research for the older children, yeah. Most effective for more experienced learners with stronger prior knowledge. So they're looking at secondary students learning science. Who benefited most from an inquiry-based approach? It was those who were strong in science. And the earlier study that I mentioned in the China schools where they had reported improvement in scientific knowledge, in that group, they also looked at kids who already initially at the baseline had higher scientific knowledge and kids who had lower scientific knowledge. Who benefited more? The kids with more knowledge to begin with, right? So I think these curriculums all have a place, but we need to understand, where can we exploit it the best and where are the potential lapses and weaknesses so that, we can make use of these knowledge and these practices to the best of what we know. All right, so so importance of prior knowledge, and in fact, some of the I really like some authors, who are kind of more balanced. So they are saying that, look, direct, organized, but adaptive. Adaptive means responding to the students, always responding to the students. You are never just kind of like, I talk, students are quiet. That passive traditional classroom doesn't work either. It's got to be adaptive, but instruct the child to give them the knowledge first, rather than that they're seeking knowledge through solving the problems. They may not get to the solution, and time is not best used, especially for early learners, for children who don't have the prior knowledge yet. Give them instruction, clear, organize them, adapt to the children. Seems to be what's the most effective in this group of kids. Now, reading mastery is critical, all right, because reading is key channel to knowledge acquisition. And this is for you later on, right? I always say that, if you can finish K2 with a great love for reading, we would have done very well in the preschool years, because that love for reading is then going to allow them to acquire knowledge on and on and on, because the importance of knowledge, prior knowledge or current knowledge, doesn't stop, it goes on. Motor skills are important because it's a key channel to skills, doing things, right? So we're talking about knowledge, reading. A lot of knowledge comes through reading, right? Even when they investigated the older kids, it's an important channel where they learn. But whereas for skills, you need to make sure that the children have that independence and that dexterity, right, to learn maximally, and develop their skills. All right, so just to summarize, there's a shift from teacher-led instruction to child-led learning, right? And primarily as a means to increase student engagement. So I think the intention is not wrong. And I think students need to be as active as possible, right? But that they direct it by choosing their topics, then maybe is not something that we might want to encourage, right? And the approaches that we have discussed live are in the category of child-led approaches, primarily with teachers as coaches or facilitators. So in research into the science of learning made discoveries which supports many elements of some of these philosophies, right? Like the naturalistic environment and Montessori hands-on materials phonics approach. I'm just giving some examples here, right? But what we know is that if you have reduced classroom visual clutter, your nature is good, right? You have activities that promote motor skills, especially fine motor skills, right? For both, but there's a lot of research on fine motor, spatial skills, a structured phonics instructional approach, So these are elements from the science of learning that we know will be important. And for classrooms that are using kind of combination of methodologies, I think this would be useful kind of information. But on the other hand, some discoveries that challenges would be more at the belief and kind of area. So rather than being born as competent learners, children are born with a large spectrum of learning abilities. Some are more capable than others, and it's a spectrum. And it depends on the subject area as well. You might be more capable in one area, but not so in another. Unfortunately, if left to the natural, these cognitive weaknesses are likely to hinder their learning potential, meaning left to the children's own natural, because they will gravitate towards their strength where they have a bigger green zone and move away from where they have a smaller green zone. So you want to use the preschool years to extend the green zone. So you might want to engineer it so the adult is kind of directing it a little bit more heavily in that sense, all right? So direct, organized, adaptive, teacher-led instructional guidance may be more effective for early learners. Okay, so before we go on to questions, so if you have questions that, because we're running out of time, that you really want us to get back to you, do fill in the feedback form and then we'll come back to you. If you're interested in informational sessions about what BrainFit does, we are a brain training center. Or if you're interested in the BrainFit, our kindergarten school tour, pretty much only in Singapore. I think most of our other territories are still closed to physical learning. Or if you're just interested to know more, or sign up for the next webinar, do fill in the feedback form and also give me some feedback. I I hope I haven't, kind of like, I hope it's okay. All right. I mean, I know that some of you, might be very strong proponents in certain areas. Yeah. Now, the second part of this two-part webinar, I will be talking about our approach. So after knowing what I know, I started the kindergarten, right? So that was 3 years ago. So now our kids are grown. So we have evidence. And I like the approach where we really use the science of learning. And I want to share with you some evidence that show you that we can achieve faster learning in half the time. And I mean half the time, and I'm going to qualify myself. So if you're curious to know, what exactly that we do, I will be sharing about, taking a lot of some of these methods in putting them into a preschool kind of setting, and then really measuring the kids the year, see the kind of outcomes that I might get. So do join us if you're interested in that. But otherwise, at least, I'll appreciate some feedback. Ghazali, do I have any questions? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. It's already 9:31. Let's go through the questions itself. We have one question about the research about the classroom wall is interesting. The one that less things on the wall, less distractions. But never find any school that has less visual in the classroom wall. What do you think that happens? Does school not know about this research yet?
Our school have bare walls. Some parents ask us, why do you have bare walls? We put all our artwork outside. I think it's nice, right, for the kids to look at their artwork. Look, there's social benefits, right? I'm really looking at the learning benefits. All right, can be narrow. You can argue with me that, look, would it be nice to have my artwork? I think, yeah, right? It makes you feel more family, but we have chosen to go with bare walls in the classroom. And I think, it's what you decide. And this is what we know. Now, bearing in mind, these research are also not very recent. I do think that, there is some decluttering. But, if you walk into our preschool, you might not sign up because it's too bare for you. I don't know, right? Because parents don't know, so maybe it's a balance. But yeah, come and do a school tour, in our classroom. But we have, because we apply. I can see the value, put having nature in the class. I think that's wonderful, right? Natural lighting, or a plant, something that that's I think that would just be and time on the decluttering. I do, right? Because yeah.
All right, let's jump to the next question.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you balance between building?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry if I interrupted. How do you balance between building on child's strengths or likes and encouraging them to improve on their weaknesses?
This is $1 question. I love this question. Thank you for asking this question, because this is very, very real. I have a primary 3 girl. We don't study very much, and she's getting very high marks in a certain subject. We work very, very hard, and she's still getting quite weak marks in another subject. What do I do? Right? Do I build her? If I give her more help in her area of strength, she can fly. Or do I work on her weaknesses? But I have a very, very clear philosophy in my mind. If your child is in the first 6 years, go for the weakness. Go for the weakness with all your life, because you are going to have more mileage, because the brain is wiring most rapidly in the first 6 years. If you want to neutralize any weaknesses, that is the best time. Now, we work with children that are much older in our centers. We rewire all the time. The kids need to work very hard. So brains can change at any age, but the younger you give it to us, the more benefits we can give you. And with the same amount of work, I'm saying, right? So you put in the same amount of practice, same amount of effort, you're getting that benefit for a younger child, that benefit for the older child, get that benefit for the adult, that benefit for the senior. You can still improve. You just have to work much harder when you're older. So that's my personal take. Below 6, I go like crazy after the weaknesses. The strengths will still be the strengths. The strengths will fly, right, without you doing very much, because the child naturally gravitate in any situation. They have practice opportunities that you don't even need to engineer. They avoid the weaknesses. So you need to engineer heavily in the areas of weaknesses. That's my take when I look at how the brain develops, and my priority in the different age groups. Yeah. But when you're older, when you're older, you're in secondary school, maybe a bit older, I would say go for the strengths. Just go whatever you're good at. You're good at math, just go and choose engineering subject, right? That's how I would decide for my children.
Great. So
one more question, maybe, Ga? Last question.
Sure. We have one on
ZPD. Should I answer the ZPD one?
So the point of ZPD is better to be
I see one question on the point of ZPD, and that is better to be directed versus self-led. How do we as parents identify what are their prior strengths and knowledge versus imposing on it, especially when they're so young? Can I just answer that? I think it's a good question. Parents, you can do a lot of things, but it's very difficult. You are right. In a baby, let's say you have a baby, all right? What knowledge do they have, right? You really need to observe. So you need to know broadly, there are 5 areas. You need to observe them in the motor, language. So you look at verbalization. How many words, vocabulary? We know, do they have good vocabulary? Yeah. For very young children, you need to look at hand skills, fine motor, because that's more your eye skills. So do they like manipulative kind of tasks? So that's eye-hand coordination, right? And of course, social emotionally, are they interactive? Are they connecting with people? So the 5 core brain areas, and you observe them as closely as you possibly can in each of the areas. Right, and you will start to see things. You never impose. If I am not able to build a block, okay, I can't even build a tower of 2 blocks. It's okay. Just hold the blocks, bang, bang, bang first. You start, but you don't keep the blocks. But you never force the child with the hand and build. That's not scaffolding. That's not how ZPD is used. You bang the blocks first. Then you know what? You drop the blocks into a container. Just release. You manipulate it, right? And slowly as you practice, then the child will spend more time, right? So you can rewire through close observations and then slowly inching, and then widening your green zone. So join our baby class, right? If you need some help, right? Our baby class is all about really teaching parents, what are the important skills, and then how do you use scaffolding and ZPD, to help the children lead to as big a green zone as you possibly can through scaffolding and observation. I think that's all the time we have.
Yes, thank you very much, Cheryl.
Thank you, guys.
Still, so you have access to the feedback form even when the webinar has ended. We'll try to answer the questions, but if you do have questions not answered, you can actually fill it in the feedback form as well, so that we can answer maybe to the next session as well. It's 9:37. I think we're gonna wait for maybe 1 more minute.
Yes, and I'm just going to answer Grant. Grant, come to my next webinar. I will be talking about my kids and what happened to them. Right, I'm just referring to the question on what type of outcomes did I experience with my girls, right? I'm going to share that as well. One went through my kindergarten and one went through, like I mentioned, the REGGIO approach. Yeah. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just half a minute more, Ga?
Oh, yeah.
Half a minute more, we'll close this. Yeah, thank you very much. Such great questions. Sorry, we don't have the time. I'll try and answer some of them. Maybe we'll come back in 2 weeks' time. We're still on a webinar. I see a lot of good questions, and I think they warrant some discussion. But please come back. I'll try and put time and answer some of those. 2 weeks' time, we'll talk about a brain-based approach, right? And I'll try and answer some of these. So do join us. So, goodbye. Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thanks, panelists. Thank you for all your help. All right. Keep well, everybody. I shall end the webinar right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.